Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, June the 25th, 2025. Today there is a new moon at around 4 degrees Cancer, and in this video I want to consider what this new moon might mean, what it might mean for us as individuals, but also what it could mean for the world at large. But before I look at this new moon in detail, I want to go over the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, June 25th. So here is the chart for today, set for noon, New York time, on the 25th. And I should ask, if you happen to like this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to indeed like it by pressing the like button, wherever that might be. Also, if you're not subscribed, I would be very happy to have you as a subscriber. So anyway, here is the chart for today, and you can see that there is a new moon. Definition of a new moon is when the sun and the moon are conjunct, and so at noon New York time, the moon is at 7 degrees Cancer, sun is at 4 degrees Cancer. So yeah, they're pretty much in the same place. So there's a big Cancer emphasis here. With there's 4 planets in this sign. You've got Mercury in Cancer, Moon in Cancer, Sun in Cancer, Jupiter in Cancer. So all of the descriptions of Cancer that one can think of possibly apply today, and that includes the emotional side of things, because Cancer, it can be a sign that is unusually emotional, that does have powerful feelings. And when you look at the chart for today, what you do notice is that there are no planets in air signs unless you count Pluto. So, we have had a lot of planets in air signs, all those planets in Gemini, but now they're all gone. They've now moved into Cancer. And so, it's perhaps not a day for having sort of vague discussions about nothing in particular. And, too much talking may not go down well, because of the lack of air, and it could also be a day where the emotional side is important. And it's not just the fact that there are no planets in air signs except for Pluto. There aren't actually that many planets in fire signs. Okay, you could say that Chiron, Neptune, Saturn are in Aries, but there aren't any personal planets in fire signs. And if you look at the traditional planets, well, there's just Saturn in Aries. And so, from a perspective of the traditional planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, we can see that 6 out of 7 are in negative signs. The negative signs are Earth and water, and so you might say that there's something rather receptive about today. It's about observing. It's about perhaps picking things up on an emotional level. It's not so much about taking the initiative. And sure, you might say, okay, there's a new moon. Of course, I'll be talking about the new moon in detail at the end of this video, and you could say that the new moon is about starting something, taking the initiative, but not necessarily at the exact time of the new moon. Yeah, the new moon represents a beginning, but it might be a fragile beginning. The moon is very close to the sun. The moon might be overwhelmed by its proximity to the sun, and it's only in a day or two following the new moon that you can really start to initiate things. Especially when the moon moves to a different sign. So with the sun in Cancer, when the moon moves into Leo, things change and things do get easier. Especially as when the moon moves into Leo, it will be in mutual reception with the sun. Because the sun is in Cancer, a sign ruled by the moon. The moon will be in Leo, a sign ruled by the sun. But the moon is not in Leo today. It's only in a day or two's time that it changes sign. So for the moment, we do need to be receptive, and we shouldn't feel that we have to always be initiating something. Well, that can be exhausting, and at the moment it might actually also be counterproductive. Now, the moon in Cancer, well, I should say the moon moves into Cancer London time at 4:44 a.m. So if you're in Europe or Africa, then the moon moves into Cancer, very early today. Of course, if you're in the Americas, the moon will have already moved into Cancer. The moon moves into Cancer late last night, late on Tuesday. And yeah, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, well, the moon won't move into Cancer until pretty late in the day. And so moon moves into Cancer, it makes a number of aspects. It makes a square to Saturn, makes a square to Neptune, makes a conjunction to Jupiter, and then it makes the conjunction to the Sun. And of course, moon conjunct Sun is a new moon. So you could say that this new moon is aspecting Saturn, Neptune, and Jupiter, and that moon square Saturn is something we have to take into consideration. In the run-up to the new moon, we may feel that there's stuff we just cannot do, and we might feel pretty frustrated. Just as the moon is waning, just as the moon is finishing its waning phase. Of course, when you get the new moon, that's when the moon is moving from waning to waxing, and when something is waning, it's weakening, it's losing its power. It's the old lunar cycle, and so with the moon approaching that square to Saturn, as it approaches the new moon, then the end of this cycle may be rather difficult. Things are difficult right at the end, but the new moon does very much represent a new beginning. And once a new moon has happened, it makes a sextile to Mars. So, Mars is at 4:42 Virgo. So, this is a new moon sextile Mars. And so this new moon, in its own way, actually could be quite energetic. Once we get over the problems, once we get over the frustrations that we might feel in the lead up to the new moon happens, and then we start to see what we can do. And it's not that we have to go crazy, we just have to think about what is in our power. And we don't have to do everything at once, but take it easy, one step at a time. And I think that we can use this new moon as a springboard for really good progress. And so that's the picture in the sort of Americas, or particularly New York. If we switch to Sydney, Australia, here's the new moon, June the 25th, noon, Sydney, as a representative of Australasia. And you see that the moon is at 28 Gemini. So for most of the day, the moon is in Gemini. It's not in Cancer. And so, while the moon is in Gemini, things may be relatively easy. You might feel that nothing much is going on, but perhaps there's no pressure, and could be a good time for sort of talking about nothing in particular. But then, the moon does make that change, and then all the Gemini has gone. But as far as the difference between the Americas and Australasia is concerned, it's just that first part of the day when the moon is not in Cancer in Australasia, it's still in late Gemini. So probably in Australia it takes a bit of time for things to really get going, and you don't really understand what the day is all about until perhaps the mid-afternoon. Now, turning to the heliocentric view, putting the Sun at the centre of the solar system, and we still have Earth opposition Jupiter. So yesterday we had Sun opposition Jupiter, geocentric, which is the same as Earth opposition Jupiter, heliocentric, and this aspect is still there. And so Earth opposition Jupiter could be tense. We might just feel that there's something we have to do. What can we do? How can we use our energy? And additionally, the Earth is now starting to make a square to Mars. And so Earth square Mars could be about feeling one just has to assert oneself. One just has to find a way of applying oneself to whatever the problem is, whatever is that issue. We don't want it to hang around forever. We want to create change. And it's not just us that want to create change. It's maybe a lot of other people. That's the kind of atmosphere we're living in. But are we going to be successful in terms of creating change? Well, maybe, but we don't want to exaggerate, and we don't want to take things faster than we need to. And one heliocentric aspect we do have is that we have Venus trine Jupiter. So heliocentrically, we've got Venus in Pisces trine Jupiter in Cancer. And so Venus and Jupiter making a trine aspect, it may be that a lot of things actually start to work, and it's quite a generous aspect. And so perhaps we can take advantage of someone else's generosity, or perhaps we can be generous ourselves. But having a generous approach and thinking the best of people and giving them a chance may not be such a bad thing. We've still got to look after our own vital interests, but that doesn't mean that we can't just show some consideration. Give people a chance. I think that is important with Venus trine Jupiter. And of course, Venus trine Jupiter says something about relationships, and it may be a time when relationships can be very fulfilling, and they might even be able to exceed our expectations. I mean, that is the possibility, that is the potential in that heliocentric chart. And heliocentrically, if it's heliocentric, it says something about the collective, and perhaps people have had enough of conflict, but still the Earth is making a square to Mars. There's plenty of possibilities there for people disagreeing. So there's our heliocentric picture, and now it's time to look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, June the 25th, 2025. Aries. Today we have a new moon, and I think that this new moon might be quite important. It is in an angular sign. You're an Aries. Your sign Aries is angular. Cancer is angular. So you've got a new moon in Cancer, and so this new moon might represent the beginning of a new phase in your life where you start to see things in a different way. You might in the past have felt that you had the duty almost to shake things up, to be the person taking the initiatives. But this new moon is actually quite security orientated. And what you might like to do is find some kind of anchoring. You want to be able to know what's going to happen next, and insecurity is something you're going to want to avoid. So with this new moon, you might want to think about your home and your family, and what makes you feel comfortable. And additionally, this new moon is conjunct Jupiter, and Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So perhaps with this new moon in conjunct Jupiter, you have a chance to really bring things down to earth, and you can create an environment which actually could be quite nurturing. And the moon does make a sextile to Mars. So you've got the new moon making a sextile to Mars. Of course, Mars is your ruler. So if you've got new moon sextile Mars, that might be about you being able to take active measures to make things more comprehensible for yourself. And you don't want things to be confusing. You want things to be absolutely clear. And I think, through your efforts, through your simple efforts, I think you can go a long way, towards really clarifying things. But it needn't be a boring process. In fact, if you make the effort, you can actually start to really tune into your fundamental creativity, and to think about things which you excel in. Sometimes you can forget what you're really good at, perhaps because you're not because you think that other people are not interested, or you're dealing with something that you've been doing for so long, but you've just got a bit jaded. You don't think anyone cares, but actually they do care. And Aries, if you can really bring to bear your key talents, I think that people will notice, and people will actually find it reassuring. So it's very important, Aries, today, that you absolutely do not doubt yourself, because I think you've actually got quite a major contribution to make. Taurus, there's a new moon today, and I think that this new moon is pretty easygoing. It's in Cancer, and Cancer is a sign which Taurus has a fairly natural affinity with. These two signs just don't clash. There's no conflict, and you just feel that many things are possible, and you don't really have to take risks. It may be about just talking about something, picking up the phone. You discuss some of your ideas, and there's a good chance that you get positive feedback. And so it really is important that you don't keep your ideas to yourself. You have got something to say. You've got something to say. And I think that today you actually do have the opportunity to get things out into the open. And in many respects you can do it powerfully, and people are going to listen to you. And also with this new moon, you perhaps are able to set certain relationships on a new footing, a new and more stable footing. Perhaps there have been recent disagreements, or you've reached a conclusion that you and someone else are never going to get on, but you can reach these conclusions, but does it really change anything? Sometimes you just keep running into someone, and it's annoying, could be embarrassing, but you mustn't assume that anyone, however set in their ways they seem, can't actually transform themselves. And so perhaps you should be giving people a chance, and allowing people to really express themselves in the best possible light. And so talking could be important. And the talking, to begin with, it doesn't have to be particularly serious. It doesn't have to be planned. It's just all about getting a conversation together. And I think with new moon conjunct Jupiter, that does indicate that when you are talking, when you are communicating, you can be very effective. And yes, people are going to listen to you, and at the same time you're going to have a vision of how things could be. And I think that vision will actually, be very positive, and it's something that I think that many people are going to, really appreciate. Gemini, things have changed. There are now absolutely no planets in your sign, and so it might feel sort of different. You really are reminded that Jupiter has gone. Jupiter was in Gemini for so long, and now it's out. And today, we have no planets in air signs, well, except for Pluto. And so Gemini, it might at first be difficult to express yourself, at least using the normal methods. If you just talk without really thinking it through, then your words might not have much of an impact. And so it's going to be very important, whatever you're doing, that you have a purpose. You ask yourself, why you're doing what you're doing. And if you just do something just for the sake of it, because it feels like being a good idea at the time, then yeah, don't be surprised if you feel disappointed. And what you perhaps need to do is consider where are the planetary energies taking you. Well, we do have a new moon today, and the new moon is in Cancer, and so this new moon might have a financial side to it. It might be about what you have, and it does contrast with the previous sign, with Gemini. So in Gemini you could say, well, you're building yourself up, you're deciding what you want, you're making the big decisions, and now you have to think about, well, do you actually have the resources to see it through? And that just might be a general question, and it might even be quite a long-term question. If you're thinking about yourself and what you want to do, and you might be thinking years into the future, again, do you have the resources? And it may not just be about money in your bank account, or how much you've got saved, whether or not you've got a house, these kind of questions, or an apartment. It just may be about resources that actually go beyond money. It may be about maybe about intellectual resources as well. And again, it's not just possible to just talk about it. You actually have to be quite purposeful and really start to consider what you need. And the new moon might, in this sense, be helpful. It could be a new beginning for you, and the new beginning is also related to the fact that this new moon is conjunct Jupiter. So Jupiter can make things easier. It can be quite protecting, provided you give Jupiter respect. Jupiter is a planet that is exalted, and if you accept perhaps that something else might be prepared to look after you if you gave it the chance, then there might be a favourable outcome. But you've got to give it a chance. You can't just accept that, or if you can't just think that Jupiter's just going to just be there for you. You're not going to have to do anything in return. Yeah, there is some work to be done. So that may be how the new moon is manifesting. Additionally, you have to think about perhaps your resources relating to ability, and you do have particular social skills which may not be mainstream, but they are there if you were able to utilize them. Perhaps you had been very effective at dealing with people in the past using a particular technique, but maybe very individual to you, and now you are given another chance to look at it. Perhaps you haven't used it for years, but in fact it could really be very effective. And the new moon may have a social dimension, may not be obvious, but it actually does have a social dimension because it's conjunct Jupiter. And in the Gemini chart, Jupiter is about the other person, and so new moon conjunct Jupiter might be about a new beginning with another person, another situation. And so don't think that everything has become stale, that there's nothing you can do, that everyone's going to behave in a particular way, and you just have to accept the situation. It really isn't like that. And so you've got to make the effort, and I think it is about effort. You can't just, as I said right at the beginning, you can't just talk. You can't just allow your mind to go from one place to another. You've got to have a purpose, and you've got to ask, what is it all about? And it is all about utilizing your resources and really doing it properly. And you can't take anything for granted. You've got to make sure that you bring everything into play. And yeah, I think that is something that today you very much can do. Cancer. Cancer, there's a lot of stuff going on in your sign at the moment. There is a new moon in Cancer, and this new moon in Cancer may represent a new beginning. I mean, as a Cancerian, you are often, very sensitive to the lunation cycle, both in a good and a bad way. As you move through the lunation cycle, you can move from one state to another, being sometimes feeling a bit down. Then the lunation cycle changes, and that can cheer you up. And it kind of depends on not just the stage of a lunation cycle, but what kind of lunation cycle it is, and what kind of lunation cycle is this that we are entering into. Well, it's a Cancerian lunar cycle. It is the new cycle. New moon is in your sign. So for you, this represents, or can represent, a very fortunate beginning. Now, that's not to say that it's going to be totally straightforward. I mean, the new moon is square Saturn, and this new moon square Saturn does indicate responsibility. There are things that you are expected to do, and if you don't do them, or you sort of look the other way, or God forbid you're lazy, well then really you can't expect much to happen. But if you really use this moon square Saturn, this new moon square Saturn, then I think that you can really have a powerful impact. And then the new moon itself, the closest aspect that this new moon has is to Jupiter, and Jupiter is in a great position. It's in your sign. It's exalted, and so Cancer, it's very important that you are enthusiastic, you're positive. Whatever's happened in the past, you should be positive and optimistic. Maybe in the past things haven't always gone your way. You might assume that because things in the past have not gone your way, it's going to continue like that. Well, the pattern has changed, and yeah, it is a new moon, and really do your best to take advantage of it. And this applies to the whole way you are able to express yourself. You can come over as being a larger than life person, as someone who really cannot be ignored, but at the same time you can give the impression that you're very disciplined. You're not someone to take lightly, and so it's okay to be serious, and that seriousness really is going to be appreciated. So Cancer, it would be easy to sort of complicate things, to sort of say, oh well, the moon is square Saturn, so it could be difficult, but it isn't difficult, and it's all part of the same thing. Because right now you've got new moon conjunct Jupiter, square Saturn, square Neptune, and this does say something about what is happening around us for all of us, regardless of our sign, but it is personal to you. And yeah, we could analyze that and talk about the obstacles in front of you, but it's not really about obstacles. If there are obstacles today, then I think you can turn it round, and you can use that to actually spur you forward. And so Cancer, what do you want to do today? It's not just today. What do you want to do over the next month? This is a new lunation cycle. It's a Cancer lunation cycle. It's a Jupiter lunation cycle. Jupiter, the planet of luck, in an incredible position in its exaltation. So I think that it's just very important that you're bold, and you don't necessarily have to be brave. I mean, not in a way that is risking anything, but you have to be prepared to take things as far as you can, and don't think you can't. And your feelings at the moment with with 4 planets in the sign Cancer are going to be very, very finely tuned, and so you can use your feelings to to pick your way forward, and in fact to just understand how things are, and you're going to just understand what people are like, what they can put up with, what you can get away with. And I actually think, Cancer, that today you can get away with quite a lot. Leo, you don't want to do much, possibly, because you just have your doubts, and you just wonder where things could go, and there may be some fears there, and you have to think, are these fears reasonable? Now, there is no harm in being cautious. It's always good to be cautious, and perhaps recently you did have the chance to be less cautious than usual. You could have been more of an extrovert than usual, but things have changed, and so, Leo, perhaps you are justified in being wary, but you've got to be realistically wary. Some of your fears are just simply not real, and you do have to be aware of that. But there is a new moon in Cancer, and this new moon in Cancer is emphasizing what can't be seen. And so what is it that can't be seen? Like, it could be your fears, if you are of a sort of a negative frame of mind, or rather an overly negative frame of mind. But there is another way of looking at it. It might be that there are things that you need to do with this new moon that you don't want to advertise. I mean, you might like to advertise them in a perfect world, but it's perhaps a time where you really need to think about yourself and timing. And timing always matters. And we live in a society where everything should happen right now, and there's no time like the present. But if you can just hold off and just see this whole lunar cycle, until the next new moon, you can perhaps see this whole lunar cycle as something preparatory, and you can really do some very useful work on your own, without necessarily needing anyone's help. And that doesn't mean that you are powerless. You are not powerless at all. You actually have the ability to really make things happen. And if you really want something to happen, it can happen. But the question is, how best do you exercise that power? And I think that if you were to exercise that power in a very public way, then you might be able to make an impression, but I think it might be less than perfect. On the other hand, if there's something you decide you want to just get on with, and you don't want to be disturbed, and you don't want to talk about it, then that power can sort of manifest in quite a secretive way. And when it is manifesting secretly, it will be maximized, because it won't have to deal with other people's gaze and attention, and people's gaze and attention can often mess things up. It's not necessarily lucky for you. And another reason why you might not want to be completely open about things is because you're still making up your mind. There are things you haven't quite understood. Okay, maybe you've understood them, but you don't know where your position should be. And I might actually be talking about your ethical position. It's a question of what is right and what is wrong. And so if you're thinking about future action, when you start to think about what is indeed the right thing to do, it just may not be obvious, and you may not be able to answer that question immediately. And so that would be a reason why you might want to wait. Sometimes it just takes a long time to make the right decision, and perhaps you don't have all the facts, and you just have to wait. But in a month's time, by the end of this lunar cycle, when the sun is moving into your sign. Of course, the sun moving into your sign, that's great, because sun moving into your sign, sun is in its own sign in Leo, so that's a time of year to be really looking forward to. And so you could say that this new moon represents a final stage of preparation. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, I'm always supposed to say something about relationships, and relationships may or may not matter to you, but relationships may not necessarily be especially helpful. You may find that some people are being too judgmental and are presenting you with issues that you don't need to deal with, but somehow you have to deal with. And I have suggested already that this is a time when it is best that you do things on your own, in your own way. So so if we're talking about a partnership, so if partnership is about you and other people, or perhaps one other person, cooperating in order to get something done, it may not work, because actually you have quite an individual approach, and if anyone gets really close to you, it may show something that isn't necessarily very attractive. What do I mean by attractive? I'm talking about a personality trait that is emphasized. It may just be your determination. Yeah, you are determined, but you're not in the mood for publicly showing that determination. But if you have to publicly show your intensity, then that might not go down well. Even if you have to show another person how interested you are in something, how really keen you are to make it happen, again, that might backfire. So don't feel that you have to involve other people in whatever you happen to be doing, because I think on your own you can make really good progress. Virgo, there is a new moon today. I mean, the new moon is is the headline aspect, and I would regard this new moon as being fairly benign in your case. It makes you think about yourself and where you fit in, and I think you are going to want to fit in. Recently, many Virgos have been quite concentrated on what they want, and perhaps on their ambitions, and that might be an after effect of Jupiter having spent a year in your sign, and now Jupiter is out of your sign. You're starting to think about perhaps different priorities, things that you decide that you might want after all. And now you think about it, it's not just about status, power, achievement, advancement. It's something more subtle than that, and perhaps something more long term. And this may be reflected in this new moon. This new moon could, for example, be about your hopes for the future. What do you want in the future? And the future, I'm not talking about just the next few days. I might be talking years, even decades. And you want to do something that is right for you. And that can sometimes be difficult for Virgos, because Virgos can concentrate on what's taking place on the surface, perhaps surface accomplishments, and they might sometimes find it difficult to really get into the heart of a matter. But I think that this new moon does allow you to find the heart of things, what is really important, and you can get your priorities right. And this is especially the case because the new moon is conjunct Jupiter, and Jupiter is a planet that is about a vision, and it's about your vision, and you can start to tune into that vision, and you really don't want to make things difficult for yourself. You don't want to just sort of hold yourself back by saying, well, you can't have this, because no, if you have a real vision, if you can just let go of all of your concerns, and think, well, you don't deserve this, it's not practical. You've got to think about what it is all about, and that might be quite a spiritual thing. Saying what are you on this planet for? And the new moon conjunct Jupiter might give you clues in this direction. Now, the new moon does have a social dimension. It is about you and other people, and what you and other people can create together. And if you have the chance, you should be thinking about friends and other social connections, what you're doing with others. And even if you're completely alone, maybe particularly if you're completely alone. If you are completely alone, then you don't have to be completely alone with this new moon conjunct Jupiter. It's perhaps a time for thinking about societies, groups, associations, and maybe you can do something better in a crowd not in a crowd, but in a group, than on your own. Maybe it's a time for joining something. Are you thinking about joining anything? It could be some local society. It could be a political party, or it could actually be about political engagement. And political engagement, takes many forms. You don't necessarily have to go anywhere or meet anyone. It can of course nowadays it can be online. But you are part of society, and society does matter, and it's something that can really help you to make the most of what you have. So that is a theme of this new moon conjunct Jupiter. And remember, Jupiter's gone into Cancer. Jupiter's going to stay in Cancer, well, I think for the next year. And so it is a time. It's a time, Virgo, when you need to think about what is possible in a social sense. And if today you make a real effort to meet people, to mix with people, then I think you're actually going to be really pleasantly surprised. So there should be actually no reason for solitude, and your any reservations you might have. Now, there are reservations. This new moon is square Saturn, but I think that these reservations are not necessarily useful. You could hold yourself back. You could come up with reasons why you can't do something. There may be some residual shyness, but don't let it stop you. Don't let it prevent you from becoming part of society and actually doing something which links you up with other people, because the right people can make a big difference, and it can be make a big difference to you, and they can actually give a boost to your own individuality. You think that if you want to be an individual, you mustn't have outside interference, but in fact sometimes you need other people in order to really recognize who you are, and to recognize what makes you special. Libra, this new moon which we have, this new moon conjunct Jupiter today, and I think that this new moon is great. I think that it really is fortunate for you, and you might have questions about it. It has been suggested. I look at the comments section, and I think it's been suggested that when you've got a load of planets in Cancer, that is in some way unfortunate for Librans. I don't get that, not at all. Especially now. You've got Jupiter is in Libra. Sorry. let me rephrase that. What I meant to say was, there has been, looking at the comments section, there has been this view that for Librans, when you've got a lot of Cancer, a lot of stuff in Cancer, it can be difficult for Librans, and I'm just saying I do not go with that at all. Particularly now with Jupiter in Cancer, and this new moon really does emphasize the fact that Jupiter is in Cancer, because this new moon it's conjunct Jupiter, and so it is a fortunate new moon, and it's particularly fortunate for you. This new moon is taking place in a cardinal sign. You Libra are a cardinal sign, so it allows you to absolutely project yourself. You can project yourself, very powerfully. And Libra, if you are going into work today, not just today, over the next few weeks, you can make things happen, and your vision really makes you stand out. So if you have a view about the way things should be, the way things should be organized, then don't hold back, Libra, because you know how it all works, and you're also actually quite ambitious. You're not just ambitious for yourself, but you're ambitious for the organization you're involved in. If you happen to be involved in an organization, if you're running your own business, then I think that the new moon conjunct Jupiter does mean that you are going to want to really make things happen, and you're going to want to take things as far as you can. And so this whole lunar cycle between now and the next new moon. When is the next new moon? I should know. The next new moon is going to be end of July, isn't it? So the next new moon is July the 24th. So between now and the next new moon, you can take big strides forward. And so I know Northern Hemisphere, it's the summer, and some people do like to sort of slack off over the summer, but if you're working, then don't slack off. And also, if you have an idea, then don't just let it go. Don't just dismiss it. And even if the idea is completely overambitious, or at least appears to be overambitious, it just seems to be wildly optimistic with no chance of ever being realized, even then, maybe even particularly then, you need to push it and just take it as far as you can, and perhaps you're going to be able to streamline it and make what starts off as being completely impractical, instead you can turn it into something that really can work, and it really can be structured. Now, this new moon is true, it's square Saturn, and that square Saturn is okay up to a point. Now that square Saturn may indicate that there are going to be outside forces that you have to take into consideration. And if you give them too much consideration, they could slow you down. So, by all means, think about other people and their influence on you, but don't let any one person or any one organization have too much power, because it is all about you and what you actually can achieve. And I do think that you can really achieve a great deal. And additionally, Libra, even if it's not about sort of work and business, it's just your life in general. Additionally, Libra, you need to think about what you're good at. Really think about what you're good at. And it's easy to dismiss your talents, but now that's absolutely not something you should be doing. You should be really, really making the most of them, and you're doing it in a really quite assertive way. Make sure that you do things your way. It's actually not a time to be spending too much, to be worrying too much about compromise or not rocking the boat. No, if you feel you need to do something in a particular way, then in most cases you should do it, because I do think, Libra, it really can be a lucky day, and I actually think that it also can be a lucky lunar cycle. And looking at the next month, things do change. Okay, Venus is in Taurus at the moment, and you might say that Taurus is a difficult sign for you. I mean, but it's not really a difficult sign. It's only a difficult sign if you insist on looking at things on a surface level. If you really understand things at a sort of deep level, if you're prepared to ask questions, if you're prepared to use your emotion to leverage your feelings and get into the power of your feelings, then that's going to help you even more. And then Venus isn't in Taurus for the whole month. Venus soon enough will enter Gemini. When does it enter Gemini? I think in probably like 10 days time, something like that, beginning of July. And when Venus enters Gemini, there's going to be a new way of looking at things. So perhaps right now you need to just concentrate on making the most of everything and perhaps being single-minded about it. But when Venus moves into Gemini, when your ruler moves into Gemini at the beginning of next month, you'll be able to take on a new approach, and perhaps there'll be scope for greater variety. But that will all develop naturally. So overall, Libra, there is a lot to be optimistic about. Scorpio, don't hold yourself back. Give yourself a free rein, and don't have doubts. And you mustn't assume that everything is right in front of you, that you can act on the basis of what you know. There are things you don't know, and there are still things that need to be understood and explored. And if you can do some exploration over the course of the day, I think that would be good. Do ask questions, and don't think that all the answers are right in front of you. And if you allow yourself to go further, then you'll see that there are many sort of new possibilities. And this is down to the fact that we've got this new moon conjunct Jupiter. Jupiter, and it's in Cancer. Cancer is a sign which is Scorpio friendly, and not only is it Scorpio friendly, but it is a sign that is expansive and future orientated. Now, that is not a description you normally associate with Cancer as being expansive and future orientated, but it is when you look at things from a Scorpio perspective. And so you can use your feelings and your memories as well to move forward. And so you could say that you are feeling secure because of who you are and because of what you know and what you feel. And because of that security, you can explore. You know that nothing bad is going to happen. You can play with ideas. And you don't have to be completely tied down by, by one set of principles, by one philosophy, or even one spiritual or religious belief. You have to, take things further. And the new moon conjunct Jupiter is an aspect that actually could be very, very spiritual. And, I assume that you have some degree of spirituality, and that you are sort of looking beyond the material. And so if you do some exploration, exploration does take many forms. It can be the kind of exploration that, doesn't require any physical movement. You are exploring with your mind and your soul. And that's one thing you can do. You absolutely do not have to travel to the other side of the world. I mean, how is that going to help? It's you that matters. You can't have a situation where spiritual growth depends, for example, on making a pilgrimage. Pilgrimages, are nice ideas, but you don't have to travel thousands of miles to honor something, because if it really is valid, surely it's with you. It's with you all the time. And perhaps any pilgrimage you make is going to be an internal pilgrimage, and or it can be a pilgrimage, about your own living space. You can create the object of your pilgrimage right where you're sitting or standing right now. It could be ritualistic. Small rituals, can be important, and they can remind you that that there is a part of your life that is special, and devotion might have its role, but you don't want to be too fixed about it. And that perhaps is another problem about pilgrimages for the sake of pilgrimages, particularly if they have a regularity to them, because it implies that something is not changing. And if you're going to be traveling, then you want to change in that process of travel. And devotion for the sake of devotion, that's not necessarily what you should be doing. And what I'm kind of suggesting is that whatever your opinions or whatever your views, they should not be fixed, and you don't have to go anywhere to see things on a higher level, and perhaps to realize that in some respects, existing philosophies, may have been limiting. And so that could be a way in which new moon conjunct Jupiter works. But Jupiter, when we're talking about Jupiter, when you think about I don't know anything about Greek, but I believe that in Greek, if you look at Ptolemy, and how he describes Jupiter, what the Greek translation for Jupiter is, I believe it's Dios. So it's like God. And so there is a God nature to Jupiter with this new moon, with this new moon conjunct Jupiter, and there may be a sense of the divine, a sense of a divine, which sure you always have. You always have this sense. You're a Scorpio, but it may be especially powerful at the moment, with this new moon, and it really might, bring you forward and elevate you. And so. Just be open to new experiences with this new moon, and it's not just about today. It is about this whole lunar cycle, but between now and the end of July. Now, one final thing about this is, you should always prepare for the future, and you should be thinking about, what is the next stage. At the end of July, there is a new moon in Leo. When this cycle runs its course, you've got a new moon in Leo, and that new moon in Leo might not be a spiritual influence. It might actually be quite a material influence, and that new moon in Leo might be about taking some of the experiences you have over the next month and actually realizing you have to utilize them. So yes, there could be a big spiritual emphasis over the next month, but it's not just about the spiritual. There may be other things you're learning and experiencing over the next few weeks, but could be relevant, in a material way. They could be relevant to your ideas about your work, your career, perhaps a business, but also just relevant to where you want to go to next. And with the new moon moving into Leo, with the new moon in Leo in a month's time, that might be very, very focused. And do just be prepared for that change, which isn't so far off. It's just another month. Sagittarius. Jupiter is your ruler, and Jupiter is certainly emphasized at the moment. We do have a new moon conjunct Jupiter, and so this allows you to really tune into yourself and what you're all about. And this process of understanding yourself and understanding your own power may not at first be entirely easy, and part of the issue might be the fact that this new moon is in Cancer, and as I've said quite recently, Sagittarius and Cancer are two signs that don't always relate to each other. There is a certain incompatibility between Sagittarius and Cancer, at least on the surface. But what this Cancer emphasis is really about is you being able to really look at things on a new level, being able to really go deeply into something. We're not just talking about surface details or things that just seem exciting just for the sake of excitement. Some Sagittarians, they do like excitement. They want action, and sometimes the action that a Sagittarius can be interested in may have a trivial side to it, and perhaps this new moon is reminding you that things are serious, and that you need to take yourself seriously, and have serious thoughts, and be prepared to consider the emotional dimension. And that's not something that Sagittarians always do. I mean, Sagittarius is a fire sign, but sometimes you need to you need to stop what you're doing and tune into the power of a situation. And if you can do this, then I think it really should work for you. You have strong feelings actually, and this new moon may actually mean that you take something seriously that perhaps you had never really taken seriously before. You may have trivialized it. You may have thought that it wasn't special, and now you realize how special it is. And additionally, the new moon may force you to ask questions, to find out what is really going on. And you might have made assumptions, that things are just going to all work out in a sort of easy, natural way, and you don't have to ask those questions. Let other people deal with it all. But that's not what it's about. You're being challenged to find out. And perhaps you have to do some research. You have to look at things that you don't normally want to look at. Maybe the small print, complicated agreements. And for some Sagittarians, this new moon could be about trusts, legacies, wills, complicated joint financial arrangements that perhaps you hadn't really wanted to worry about. It all seemed too complicated, and why bother yourself? But now you can deal with it, and it's not just about a new moon lasting today. It's not even just about a lunar cycle lasting until the end of next month. It may be about the next year. And if you want to make the most of Jupiter, your ruler in Cancer, then really be prepared to ask questions, for the next year. And don't be satisfied with the first answers. People might want you to go away, so they tell you things that are supposed to be simple, and you're supposed to just go away. But if you keep asking those questions, then you will in the end find those answers. And it just could take some time, and you might have to be very persistent. Now, this Cancerian emphasis may also say something about relationships. And you've just had Jupiter moving through Gemini. Well, we had a lot of other stuff moving through Gemini more, over the last month. But with this Gemini emphasis, you had perhaps seen certain relationships in one way. Okay, it was all about the other, having to deal with the other person, and you accepted that. And now, with all these planets moving out of Gemini into Cancer, and with this new moon conjunct your ruler, conjunct Jupiter, then it becomes clear that certain relationships are more complicated than you'd realized, because you're dealing with a real person. You're not dealing with a script. And we tend to see people as scripts, and we assume they're going to behave in particular ways, but that's just our projection. And so now you see another person as being real. I mean, very real, and in a way that may not always be comfortable, having to deal with a person who has their own thoughts, their own feelings. They have their own plans, their own fears, their own expectations, and that can be difficult dealing with real people. But right now you can do it. You have a chance to really understand another person on an emotional level, and not just on an emotional level, on a total level, and as far as you ever can. I mean, it's always going to be impossible to really understand another person, but you can go a long way, I think. Capricorn, a lot of stuff in Cancer now. Got a new moon in Cancer. Got Sun, so that means Sun, Moon in Cancer. Got Jupiter in Cancer. Got Mercury in Cancer. Because Cancer is an important sign for you, because Cancer is your opposite sign, and so this sign Cancer, it says something about the other, and the people you, like it or not, have to deal with. And so you might say that a new moon in Cancer is going to be about relationships. I'm sure if you look at any horoscope 12 sign forecast for today, Wednesday, for Capricorn, it will go on and on about relationships. And so, all things being equal, certain people may have a bigger influence than usual. It will be difficult to ignore them, difficult to avoid them. And you might say, well, that's not such a good thing, because you're not necessarily in control. You would like to be in control, but having to deal with another person can be a pain. But really, it's about accepting what you knew anyway. None of us have 100% control. Even if we're completely alone, we're not in full control. There's always the other to consider. And with this new moon, Capricorn, you might have a chance to consider that other and to really start to understand how it is that someone else is able to have a big influence on you. And not just someone else, it might be an organization, an institution, it might be society at large, and you might then be aware of the limits of your control. And that awareness is a good thing, because in fact that awareness gives you greater power. And you can, if you know how your power is being limited, then you may be able to do something about it. If you don't know why you're not doing as much as you can, if you don't know why you're not getting the results you expect, you can now see what's happening. And this new moon may represent a new phase in some relationship that you're involved in. It could be a brand new relationship. That would be a classic way of looking at this new moon, especially as it is conjunct Jupiter. And that could be a new relationship which might actually be very lucky for you. You could actually be at the receiving end of someone else's generosity. And generosity can take many forms. So if you feel that you want to be in a relationship and you're not in a relationship, then perhaps this new moon can be very useful. But don't have expectations. Relationships and astrology, I know people want to know about relationships and astrology, but it's so difficult. Relationships are one of the most fragile areas of human existence, and it's always been the case. And so, if you are looking for something to happen, with relationships, I'm saying it can happen because of this new moon conjunct Jupiter, but don't think about it, because thinking about it can spoil the magic. But if you are in a relationship, then new moon conjunct Jupiter, well, it may actually indicate that you want more. So if you are involved with someone, not necessarily romantically, or you might be married to someone, whatever, your expectations are going to be higher than usual. And we're probably talking about something not just about the short term. You might actually be talking about the whole of the next year. You want more and you expect more. And if another person is not delivering, you're going to be very clear to yourself that there is a problem. And so, what do you do when you have high expectations? You can be more demanding, or in certain situations, you might be looking elsewhere. If one person is not coming up with the goods, then you might be looking further afield. So that is a possibility. But perhaps you have to also think about your expectations and ask yourself, whether you're being reasonable. In certain situations, you might be unreasonable, and just be expecting too much. And everyone has their limitations. But with the new moon conjunct Jupiter, I think you are right to expect more, and perhaps it's about giving people a chance to show who they are and what they can do. And every relationship has a purpose, and you need to perhaps understand people as being sort of complex beings, and you shouldn't have any idea that they are unidimensional. They're not, but still, relationships with this new moon could really could be important, and it's okay to have high expectations, provided those expectations aren't completely unrealistic. Aquarius. Aquarius, if you look at what is going on at the moment, you will see that there are no planets in air. No planets in air signs except for Pluto, because we got Pluto in Aquarius. And so, Aquarius, you being an air sign, you might really feel this lack. You're thinking about, how can you express yourself? People are not really going to be into sort of endless talking at the moment, and you are an ideas person, and it's not necessarily a time where ideas are going to be appreciated, and so you might just feel that you need air. I mean, you might literally feel you need air. There's not enough air, and the air might feel stagnant. I mean, literally. So can you find that fresh air? Well, you might be able to. Perhaps you need to open windows, or just give yourself variety, but not necessarily intellectual variety. And perhaps additionally, you need to quiet your mind. Your thoughts may have been going in many different directions, but now with this sort of lack of air, you have to ask, what's it all about? And perhaps the way you need to see it is that, you have had a lot of stuff to think about, and now you need to make a transition. You need to transition into action, putting thoughts into practice, not feeling you need to have any more thoughts, but actually creating the first steps, creating the first routines and structures for your ideas to bear fruit. And so today, if you can be quite disciplined and single-minded, I think that would potentially be quite a good way of using the prevailing energies. And also, I talked about fresh air, and you might feel there's not enough air, and don't neglect your own health and well-being. It does matter, and perhaps you have been neglecting it. Perhaps you've been too into your mind and too into your ideas and thinking about things theoretically. And now, with this new moon in the sign Cancer, it is a new approach, and perhaps you could sort of mark the beginning of this new moon by the beginning of this lunar cycle by doing something that could relate to your health and well-being, and actually starting something, perhaps starting a routine. It could be to do with exercise or diet that just is life affirming, and you start it, and there's a good chance you're able to carry on with it. Though I'm not giving medical advice here. I'm just making a suggestion. And we have four planets in the sign Cancer, and Cancer is a water sign, and water sign is it may be about proximity to water. Some Aquarians can benefit at the moment, by spending time, for example, by a river or a lake, or on the beach. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go into the water. Perhaps you shouldn't. We don't want to take things too far, but there's something healing about water. It may just be having a bath or going to a spa, but something about water right now, it gives you something that maybe you've been missing, and you might just think that it's just about opening windows, having fresh air, but it may not just be about fresh air. It may just be about being able to relax, with an element that you're not necessarily familiar with at all, which is, of course, one of the strange things about Aquarius. It's supposed to be the water carrier, but it is nonetheless a sign that has a reputation for being quite objective and not for being watery at all. So perhaps with all this stuff in Cancer, you have to remember what your what your sign is all about. Yeah, it is a water carrier, but water should not be a burden. It's not like you carrying a load of water. It's about you relating to water and being able to relax in a watery environment. Pisces, there is a lot of stuff now going on in Cancer, and in particular, we have a new moon in Cancer, and a new moon conjunct Jupiter, and I think that this new moon really should work for you. It's really very helpful, and Jupiter, remember, is Jupiter's your ruling planet. Jupiter rules Pisces, and this new moon just emphasizes you. And Cancer is a sign that has a natural resonance with Pisces. So what would you like to do, and also what makes you special, what makes you important, and what is your unique contribution. And it's not about hard work, it's actually about enjoying yourself. And if you're doing something useful, really useful, then you are enjoying yourself. You should be enjoying yourself, and you should feel completely satisfied with what you're doing. So don't be satisfied with second best. And what you absolutely should not be doing today is doing something out of obligation. You might have promised promise someone you're going to do something, or you feel you have to do something, and it's really tedious. No, you should not be in that situation. You should be doing things because you want to do them, and because they are a fundamental part of your self-expression. And when you are fully expressing yourself, you're just going to be creating a load of good energy, which everyone is going to pick up on, and people will realize that you are special, and they'll give you the credit and recognition that you deserve. Yet recognition doesn't matter. This new moon is about you, and it's about what you want to do, and just remember that, and you'll be fine. Now, this new moon conjunct Jupiter is in your fifth house. It's in the fifth house from Pisces. Pisces is the first house, Aries number 2, Taurus number 3, Gemini number 4, and Cancer number 5. So the fifth house in astrology is sometimes associated with romance, and there is an argument about this, and I'm sure that some astrologers doing 12-sign forecasts will make that connection, and it could be that this new moon conjunct Jupiter has romantic possibilities, if appropriate, if that's something you want. And so you can really enjoy another person's company, but it's always on your terms, and it's not serious, because in relationships and astrology, there is this distinction between the fifth house and the seventh house. The seventh house is about sort of one-to-one relationships, and it can be quite sort of serious relationships, whereas the fifth house is more about things that are more short-term, about enjoying oneself in another person's company. And the fifth house, by the way, is a very individualistic house. So it's about enjoying yourself, in another person's company, but always on your terms. And that's what matters. It has to be on your terms. And aside from the fifth house, Pisces, you have a strong sense of purpose at the moment, a very strong sense of purpose. And if you want something, whatever it is, then Pisces, I think there is a really good chance that you can actually get hold of it. And it might not seem realistic, but just don't underestimate your willpower. And it's not a willpower that is sort of heavy and serious. It's just a spontaneous willpower. You want something, you go for it. And in most cases, I think there's a very good chance that you will actually be able to get hold of it. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 2, which is the receptive. You can see that all of the lines are broken. It's pure yin, it's pure negativity, and it's not a time for starting anything new. I mean, I know there's a new moon today, but even with a new moon, as I often say about new moons, to begin with, you need to be quite secretive about the new moon. Things need to start in darkness, but this hexagram receptive, does take things further. We have to observe. We have to respond, and it's not for us to take the initiative. Perhaps we have to let other people make the first move, or perhaps give other people a chance to make fools of themselves. We can just watch, and we can then decide what we want to do at a later stage. And this hexagram does remind us that things are changing, and we do have the bottom line moving and the top line moving. And I know that northern hemisphere, it's it's the summer, it's high summer, and it's a new moon. And the I Ching tells us, with that bottom line, it tells us that we see the first signs of winter. We see the first frost on the ground. And what the I Ching is telling us is that we are seeing the very first signs of a decline. Other people might not see it, but we can see it. We can see it. And that's perhaps what the receptive is about. And there's a suggestion that maybe one can associate the receptive with not just things which are negative, but with the cold and the ice. And it might be summer. I mean, you're not going to find ice on the ground in late June in the northern hemisphere, I don't think. Well, probably are places, but you see that frost. You see the first symbolic frost as a sign that things are not necessarily getting better. And it's not a problem. It's just something that we just need to accept and prepare for. That's always what it is about. So perhaps you're involved in a situation which it seems to be fine, but you start to see the first signs that it's not entirely fine, that there are feelings of decline. It is just going to happen, and it is a natural process. And at the moment, there's nothing you have to do about it. It's just a question of observation. And then we get the top line moving. And the top line moving, we go right through the hexagram, through all the stages of a hexagram. We get to the top line. And the top line has this incredibly dramatic image to it, which is of two dragons fighting. And these two dragons are the forces of good and evil. It even talks about the false dragon, and you can make all sorts of associations in terms of imposters and antichrists and false prophets. I mean, we don't need to be quite that dramatic. And what it says about this fight between two dragons is that inevitably both dragons are going to get hurt. We're not necessarily talking about getting seriously hurt, but when you get involved in a fight, it's not painless. And so, this is rather dramatic. Okay, I know there's a new moon today, but it is just another Wednesday. So, what does that mean for you to have two dragons fighting? And you just may be aware of the forces of good and evil around you. And maybe that's an exaggeration, but things that are future orientated, which are good and wholesome, versus things which are negative about the past and want you to hold everything back. And so these two dragons fighting one another. And so, what does it mean to you? And it does say that if you do get involved in a conflict, even if you are 100% in the right, and it's indeed, even if it's something you should be doing, you can't expect it to be damage free. Every conflict has a consequence, and so you might get hurt. I'm pretty sure I'm not talking about being physically hurt. But of course, you get. I'm not, and I'm certainly not suggesting you get involved in a fight. But everything does have a consequence. And when you get in a conflict, when you are dealing with issues about good and evil, you start to you start to see what another person is like. And because we've got two moving lines, we move to a different hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 27, which is the corners of the mouth. And the corners of the mouth could be about understanding the nature of another person. And the previous hexagram, the receptive, could be about observation. We're not taking the initiative. We're not doing anything. We are aware of certain things. We are aware that some things maybe are on the decline, or at least that process of decline has just started. And with the corners of the mouth, we observe what people are doing. We observe what people are nourished by, because the corners of the mouth is very much about eating, about being nourished. And some people are nourished by power and money and by their own selfish impulses. Other people are nourished by doing good things. I don't know, working for charity, feeding the homeless, making the world a better place. Different people are nourished by different things. And through the observation of the receptive, you actually can start to really understand people, for the first time, and it's you can see what makes them tick, and once you know what makes them tick, you're in a position to evaluate them, and so you can work out whether it's a good idea to trust them. And if they're up to no good, you should have a pretty good idea about it. It's not because you can directly see that they're up to no good. You can work it out from their behavior, from what interests them. And so that might be about what it means to the corners of the mouth. Although there is another interpretation. We've talked about the previous hexagram, the receptive, as being a situation where there isn't much you can do. I mean, there is a degree of powerlessness about the receptive, but the corners of the mouth could just be about talking. It is the mouth. What comes out of the mouth? Words. And so at some stage in the day, you may find that you, having made all your observations, having drawn your conclusions, there's something that needs to be said. And you say it, and it's the right thing to do. Now, there may be consequences. remember that top hexagram of, the top line of the previous hexagram of receptive, two dragons fighting. If you get involved in a conflict, for example, a verbal conflict, there is a cost. And maybe if you're saying something which has to be said, there might still be a cost to that. Maybe you'll get criticism. Maybe you'll get into an argument. But perhaps if something has to be said, it has to be said, and there's really not much we can do about it. And now I want to finish by looking at the new moon. And we do have a new moon today, and so let's see what this new moon is about. So here's the chart of the new moon. I've set this new moon for London. No particular reason. I have to set it for somewhere, and so the reason this new moon is so exceptional is because of its conjunction to Jupiter. So you can see that this new moon is at 4 degrees 8 Cancer, and Jupiter is at 3 degrees 33 Cancer. So the quality of this new moon is really impacted by Jupiter. And Jupiter is in Cancer. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So on a personal level, this new moon could actually be quite fortunate. And also the new moon is about new beginnings, and we want to start something off, and we're going to be helped by Jupiter. So if you feel that you want to make a beginning, you maybe want to start a new project, start perhaps a new stage in your life, then the new moon conjunct Jupiter really is going to, I think, be helpful here. And perhaps it will allow you to move beyond the past and everything in the past that might have been holding you back. And this new moon is square Saturn, so that square Saturn might say something about the immediate past, because just before the moon made a square to Saturn, and then it moves on towards a conjunction of Jupiter. And so what you're dealing with this new moon is everything that could be holding you back, Saturn, and additionally the future, because you've got a strong Jupiter. Jupiter is much stronger than Jupiter. Jupiter is much stronger than Saturn. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, whereas Saturn is fallen in Aries. So I do think that on a personal level, I think that this new moon, for many of us, could be very fortunate. Yeah, but if we make the most of it, we have to think what we want to start. We can't just expect good fortune to come our way with zero effort. We've got to, really work hard. And if we work hard, and if we plan hard, and we're, very organised, then this new moon can really work for us. And Jupiter also is a planet that is about morals. And what is right, what is wrong, and we're getting this, I think, with what's going on in the news. It's a lot of talk about Iran, for example, and we think that, I haven't looked at the news for the last couple of hours, so I don't know what's happening as I've been making this video, but people talk a lot about regime change in Iran, and because it's the right thing to do. People in the West regard the Iranian regime as being really unpleasant, and they do awful things, and so that could be Jupiter. That is a moralism of Jupiter in Cancer, and perhaps wanting to interfere. And as far as our own lives are concerned, all of us might have a moral streak which this new moon could bring bring out into the open, and we might feel that some things are absolutely right and absolutely wrong, and we have to do something about it. It may not be about the international situation. We could just be moralistic in our daily lives. Okay, if we're not moralistic, maybe someone else could be moralistic. And one problem of Jupiter in Cancer is, it's strong, but it might want to take the moral high ground, and so perhaps that's what you might notice with this new moon. Now, looking at the dial, the 90-degree dial, just to look at the midpoints on which this new moon occupies. So this being a 90-degree dial, remember, conjunctions, squares and oppositions are shown as conjunctions, and semi-squares and sextile quadrates are shown as oppositions. So if we look at this new moon, then we don't notice that. We notice that it's actually, it's not on any major midpoints. It doesn't have a lot of direct midpoints involved with it. And interestingly, it's on the Admetos Vulcan midpoint. Now that Admetos and Vulcan might sound really, really obscure. So there's a symbol for Admetos and Vulcan. And so the Admetos Vulcan midpoint is about force. I mean, Vulcan is an energy about force and perhaps the power of the state, and what kind of energy the state decides to use. But Admetos is about delay, and so although this new moon seems to be very active, it just may be that attempts to do things dramatic stuff may not entirely work out. So there could be a sense with this new moon, in the end, of disappointment, having ideas about what could be achieved and feeling one has got the resources to do it all, but somehow in the end, despite all of the optimism, all of the enthusiasm, falling short. So that is a possibility. Now, as far as the astrocartography is concerned, so it's always a good idea with new moons to look at where they fall on the globe. So if we create an astromap of this new moon. Well, one astromap I wanted to look at first is the astromap of Europe. So you see these red lines. These are all the places where that new moon conjunct Jupiter is exactly on the midheaven. What countries get particularly impacted by it. And the countries that come to mind are countries in Eastern Europe. It's exactly on the midheaven in Warsaw, the capital of Poland, and on Athens. So Warsaw and Athens are two countries that do spring to mind. And from an astrocartography perspective, there are a couple of other places. If we look at the whole world, let's take a global view of this new moon, and so here it is. You see there is that red line. Of course, it might go through. It doesn't just hit Europe. It goes through Africa, and then there is this place here, and I think this may be in Indonesia. There's a place in Indonesia where you've got the new moon on a descendant, and you've got a Saturn and Neptune conjunction right on the IC. So this could be sort of a point of energy, and then you've got all the places where the new moon is. Where the new moon conjunct Jupiter is on the ascendant, and you can see this this yellow line here. It goes, goes through Miami. It goes through Havana, and maybe there's something. I think that's in Bolivia. So I don't know what's going on in Bolivia, but there may be things happening in that country, in sort of the northern part of South America. I don't know, Bolivia, Colombia. Maybe that's governmental change, disagreements amongst governments, or someone trying to throw their weight around. So there are a few places that one might want to consider when looking at the new moon from the viewpoint of astrocartography. So that's a new moon set for London. So here is a new moon set for Warsaw in Poland, and so it's set for Warsaw in Poland. You've got Sun Jupiter conjunction on the midheaven, but you've got a Saturn Neptune conjunction on the descendant. So that certainly might say something about what's happening in there. I know that Poland's just had a new president, and the governing party and the party of a president are different, and there's conflict there. The president, he'd say just won the election. The governing party weren't too happy about that. It was a very close election, so this new moon may really highlight the political fractures in Poland. And if you go further down the line, if you go further south, and you set the new moon for Athens, then in Athens you've got the new moon. Likewise, you've got the new moon on the midheaven, and you've got Saturn and Neptune on the descendant. So perhaps we need to look at the politics of Greece and Poland. So if you are from Greece or from Poland, do look at what's happening in your country. And then some of the other places I talked to, that here is a chart set for Sucre, which is the capital of, I think that's the capital of Bolivia. It's not Bogota, am I right? I don't know. But so Sucre has Jupiter quite close to the midheaven, but it's when you actually set the chart up for Sucre, it doesn't look quite so impressive. And then there is Cuba and Miami. So you set the new moon for Cuba. You've got Jupiter on the ascendant, but you've got Saturn square the ascendant. And so what's it going to be like in Cuba? We know that America has been intervening or interfering in Iran, or bombing Iran. Of course, another place that America is very keen to change, to undermine, is Cuba. And I think I saw there was some announcement that I think Russia and Cuba were trying to set up some new logistics hub in that part of the world. Of course, America's not going to be too happy about that, and so it could be with that chart that the Cuban authorities are put under pressure by Trump and what he's trying to do to undermine the country. Of course, with Cuba and Iran. Of course, remember with Cuba and Iran, I think that if America had never placed sanctions on Cuba or Iran and had just had normal relations with them, communism would have probably fallen in the 60s or the 70s, and the current regime probably wouldn't, in Iran, probably would have found it very difficult to stay in power. So, sanctions do tend to keep governments in power. That seems to be what we've noticed. So it's a very bad way of getting rid of governments. Cuba. I'm old. I'm 63. Yeah, the communists have been in power. They got into power before I was born in Cuba, and because of American sanctions, the communists are still in power. You might want to also look at Miami. I don't know what happens in Miami. So if you relocate that chart to Miami, the new moon set for Miami, you've got Jupiter exactly on the ascendant, and the sun is exactly on the ascendant. So that new moon takes place, exactly at sunrise in Florida. Now, I don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing. It is square Saturn, and it may say something about state government, what the state government is trying to do. Could say something about the weather. I mean, Florida, of course, is a place that is always having weather events. And if you're in Florida, well, maybe you can take advantage of the fact that Jupiter's rising. There's a new moon conjunct Jupiter exactly on the ascendant in the state in which you are living. And as far as countries, and I talked about Israel. I have talked about Israel a lot, obviously. I've kind of been feeling I've been talking too much about Israel, but there's no doubt that this new moon has some impact on Israel. So here's Israel's chart, and Israel has its Venus at 4 degrees Cancer, and Venus is actually ruler of Israel's ascendant. This is the moment that Israel declared its independence, or became an independent country. So Libra rising, Venus is in Cancer. So this new moon, is exactly on Israel's Venus, and it's on Benjamin Netanyahu's Uranus. So there's Benjamin Netanyahu's horoscope, and there's his Uranus is at 4 degrees 58 Cancer. And additionally, Mossad, this is the date that Mossad, the Israeli security agency, was founded. Uranus was at 3.5 Cancer. So this new moon is on Mossad's Uranus. It's on Benjamin Netanyahu's Uranus, and it's on Israel's Venus. So inevitably, one needs to think about what's Israel going to do next, because this war is, I'm sure it's not over. And as I've suggested in previous videos, and you have to remember also that new moons do repeat themselves every 19 years. So 19 years ago, there was a new moon at 4 degrees Cancer, 3 or 4 degrees Cancer. So let me just show you this new moon. So there was a new moon on June the 25th, 2006, and there's that new moon was at 4 degrees Cancer. So that new moon certainly had an impact on Israel, because on July the 12th, just a couple of weeks after this new moon, you had the beginning of Israel's war against Lebanon. So I'm not going to go into the details, but Israel went into Lebanon, and I think that there was a view that it wasn't entirely successful for Israel. Hezbollah really were able to resist Israel. I mean, obviously, I know that Hezbollah is in a very different situation now, but the last new moon 19 years ago, Israel was about to find itself at war, and now 19 years later, again, we do have a similar situation. So that's really something that we need to be aware of. And one thing about Iran, by the way, Iran, I've talked about the supreme leader, but there is also the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, I think is his name, and he's been getting a lot of criticism. I think the criticism of the Iranian president is that perhaps he's been too much of a reformer, that he's been trying too hard to appease the West, and that because of his presidency, because don't forget, the reason he's president is because his predecessor was killed in a helicopter crash. And so perhaps what Iran is experiencing is showing that you cannot appease America. America just wants to get you, wants to overthrow you, and maybe Masoud Perzeshkin, has perhaps been naive, and if you look at his chart, he well, it's not actually, that chart is not his chart. That is his directed chart. So let me look at his chart. That's his. I don't really want to look at his directions. I want to look at his natal chart. Sorry, that's the chart I should be looking at. September the 29th, 1954, and he has his sun at 5 degrees Libra. And so he's a Libra. So we talked about Libra and how some Librans really are quite ruthless. And you think about Putin, you think about Netanyahu, Margaret Thatcher. They can be very effective political operators. But there can be a weakness to Libra. For example, Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter was an example of Libra really not working very well. Whatever you think of his policies, he meant well, but he was really not a very good president. And maybe Masoud Pezeshkian, with his sun in Libra, is perhaps, from an Iranian perspective, has not been the kind of president that Iran needed with this kind of crisis. He was perhaps too keen to try to appease the West. And this new moon conjunct Jupiter is hitting his sun, and so it may be quite a difficult time for him, and so this issue is it's not going away, is it? And of course, the other country to consider is the United States, and the United States is certainly impacted by this new moon, and so the United States has a Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Cancer, and so this new moon conjunct Jupiter, is right on a very critical point in the United States' chart. In fact, it's pretty much the United States' Jupiter return. So the question is this new moon going to be good or bad for America? Well, you might actually say, theoretically, it should be quite good for America and America's interests. Jupiter in Cancer says so much about America. Jupiter is ruler of its Sagittarius ascendant, assuming you take the view that it really was born at 5:10 p.m. 5:10 p.m. in the afternoon. And Jupiter is. It's okay. Jupiter might be quite close to the Sun, but Jupiter it's exalted, and Jupiter, as I've said earlier in this video, Jupiter is a very moralistic planet, and it has definite ideas about the way things should be, and it can be quite religious. And okay, there's a potentially hypocritical side to religiousness. Just because you go to church doesn't necessarily mean that you're a good person. But still, when you think about regime change that America has been so associated with since the Second World War, always wanting to change regimes, it sort of claims that it's for some moral purpose, but underlying it all is sort of economic self-interest. And of course, this whole Iran issue with the mullahs, it started with the fall of Mohammed Massoud, when the United States and Britain organized a coup against the elected president of Iran, Mossadegh, in 1953, and it just goes on. And so United States talking about regime change in Iran, Donald Trump talking about regime change at a time when the United States has its Jupiter return and a new moon on its Jupiter. The moralism of the United States and the desire for regime change could be in other countries, well, maybe not just Iran, is indeed going to be very strong. And could it be fortunate? I mean, could things work well for America with this new moon conjunction? I mean, in theory, they certainly could. But they could also stir America up, and create situations for America that, America might not necessarily want to get involved with, and we just should never forget that, very soon Uranus is going to go into Gemini, and I think it really does need to be emphasized. When Uranus goes into Gemini, there is a real danger that the United States goes to war, and if the United States is feeling moralistic, extra moralistic, because of this new moon, then that might encourage it to take things further. But it's not just about war. I mean, Jupiter is about the country, it's about the economy, maybe it's about the stock market. I don't know what the stock market's doing today, but yesterday when you had the announcement of the supposed ceasefire between Israel and Iran, the markets that were open went shooting up. And so we might see more of that. And I do think that the Jupiter-Saturn square is starting to separate, now. And I did say that the Jupiter in Aries, Saturn in Cancer, is connected with market cycles. A lot of people are very pessimistic about the markets, but maybe not. But I'm not giving any financial advice. I'm not making any financial forecasts here. But what I really wanted to say is this new moon certainly has an impact on the United States. So that's all I'm going to say about this new moon. Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.